If Israel does succeed in significantly setting back Iran's nuclear ambitions, preferably for all time, it will be doing the whole world a favour, and I just hope that this operation does succeed. No one wants this to become a wider war, but this operation should continue until Israel has done everything it reasonably can to completely destroy the Iranian nuclear program.
2025 is a year of change. Cultural and political disruption is transforming our nation and the global order. The rebellion against the establishment has accelerated. Australia and the Western Alliance is now at a crossroads. Either the mainstream will continue its ascendancy or the elites will prevail. Hello Tony, and g'day to all of our viewers and listeners. Great to be back. Today we'll be talking about Israel, AUKUS and the Victorian and New South Wales Liberal parties. Tony, great to be back with you.
Thanks, Dan. Nice to be here.
Well, let's start with very significant developments on the international front, which is Israel's attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, which appear to have been very successful, coupled with what you could say is basically a decapitation strategy of some key figures in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Now, obviously, Iran has said that they're going to be responding and returning fire to Israel. But Tony, we've been talking about issues in the Middle East for some time, but this appears to be a very significant turning point.
There's no doubt that it is, Dan. But let's consider the basics here. Iran, for the last 40 years, has been threatening to wipe Israel off the map. For at least the last 20 years, it's been developing nuclear weapons or trying to develop nuclear weapons. It seems over the last few months it's rapidly accelerated its progress towards a nuclear bomb. Now, ask yourself this: what would any self-respecting country do confronted by a neighbour dead set on its obliteration, about to get a nuclear bomb? Inevitably, there would be a preemptive strike at some stage. So I just think that those who are moralising against Israel right now need to ask themselves just what would they do were they and their countries in the same incredibly difficult position. So yes, I think what Israel has done is well justified. If Israel does succeed in significantly setting back Iran's nuclear ambitions, preferably for all time, it will be doing the whole world a favour. And I just hope that this operation does succeed. And I wish we would hear less from politicians, including our own, about de-escalation, because essentially talk of de-escalation is, in effect, an instruction to Israel to stop. Now, no one wants this to become a wider war, but this operation should continue until Israel has done everything it reasonably can to completely destroy the Iranian nuclear program.
In terms of the role of the US, how do you see that? There's, I guess, a view that the US should remain somewhat removed from global affairs and not enmesh itself too much. There's others who say that they should get in further behind Israel and support this effort. What do you think the US should be doing?
Well, the United States remains the indispensable country. I've always said that only one country on earth has the strength and the benevolence to be the world's policeman, and the world does need a policeman. Melbourne needs policemen, Sydney needs policemen, London needs policemen. The world needs a policeman. And in the absence of Britain, America is the only country that can. If America were to step back, perhaps Britain and France might step forward. But as we saw in Ukraine over the last few weeks, when there's been some question of whether America might support an Anglo-French stabilisation force, there's a reluctance on the part of the British and the French to go forward without American backing. And that indicates to me that for all the talk of an alternative to the United States, there is none. I can remember back in 2014, President Obama made a speech at West Point saying that America can't be the world's policeman on its own. And I made a hugely underreported speech in response where I said America need not be alone, because while Australia might not be its biggest or its most important ally, it would strive to be its most reliable ally and would be there whenever America needed help in a good cause. So America is the indispensable country. There are some questions as to how far Israel can go in destroying this nuclear program on its own. There are what strike me as plausible reports that to do the job completely, it needs the bunker-busting bombs and the delivery systems for those bunker-busting bombs that only the United States has. So I think if American help is needed to finish the job, American help should be given. That's my judgment. Not because America or indeed Israel or any country has anything against the Iranian people, but you've got to have a reasonable means of dealing with an apocalyptic Islamist regime seeking nuclear weapons and dedicated to the destruction first of the little Satan, as they call Israel, but ultimately of the great Satan, as they call the United States, and fundamentally of Western civilization.
Am I right in saying that it was in response to that speech that Obama said the world needs more Tony Abbotts or something to that effect?
Well, I think it was Kim Beazley, our then ambassador, who said that someone senior in the administration made an observation to that effect. Now, I was delighted when Kim said that. Kim, incidentally, a terrific ambassador to the United States. One of the, probably by far the most significant Labor figure never to become Prime Minister, at least in recent times. And I think Kim would have made a better Prime Minister than any of the Labor figures who have become Prime Minister in recent times. But he certainly was an outstanding ambassador to the United States. And I was happy to extend his term because he was doing such a good job. And yeah, he was as I understand it, the source of that report.
Right. And on that topic, Kevin Rudd remains ambassador. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, that's not a viable prospect ongoing. I mean, surely it's time for him to be replaced with someone who's, I think, of better standing in that context.
I'm reluctant to be too critical of a fellow member of the ex-Prime Minister's Club, and I certainly think that it's good that governments are prepared to use former Prime Ministers in the national interest. Kevin, like many others, have said very critical things about Donald Trump in the past. Donald Trump, to his credit, is prepared to overlook previous criticism. I mean, J.D. Vance, his own hand-picked vice president, was hugely critical of Donald Trump in the past. So I'm a bit reluctant to rush to join the chorus saying that Kevin Rudd is an inadequate ambassador. I think his appointment was actually quite a shrewd move by the Albanese government because it would have impressed the Americans that the Albanese government was sending someone who the government, took extremely seriously. So let's see how things go. I mean, the main thing at the moment, Dan, is not fretting over whether or not Kevin Rudd is our best envoy in Washington, but try to ensure that the absolutely vital discussions this week, the first face-to-face between President Trump and our Prime Minister, goes as well as possible, because a very great deal indeed hinges upon this. We know that the Americans are asking all their allies to lift defence spending to 3.5% of GDP. We know that the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth has already publicly required us to do something like that. We also know that Prime Minister Albanese ridiculed the idea of even moving to 3% of GDP when it was proposed by the coalition during the election campaign. So I think these are fraught discussions because they could easily go quite badly. And it's very important for Australia, first, that we get the AUKUS deal carried through, and second, that the US-Australia military partnership remains very, very strong indeed, not just for us, but for the sake of the wider region.
Well, let's talk about AUKUS. So that's now essentially under review by the US. Now, this was a deal that gave Australia basically access to 3 second-hand Virginia-class subs plus 2 more, potentially from 2032, and then from there developing our own domestic nuclear sub capabilities using shared technologies from the 3 nations. Now, that's under review. Do you think it's... how critical is it that AUKUS deal is kept? Or do you think that there's an opportunity perhaps to reshape it in a manner that might expedite some of these vital military equipment?
Well, it's absolutely vital, Dan, that the AUKUS arrangements go ahead. Personally, I'd like to see the whole process expedited. Something that I raised informally on a trip to America shortly after AUKUS was first announced back in late 2021 was the possibility of getting more or less immediately a couple of retiring LA-class nuclear-powered subs as operational training boats for Australian crews, because we need a much more powerful submarine deterrent now. It's great that we are currently going to get it in 7 years' time, but frankly, the periods of critical danger are now, not in 7 years' time. And if any conflict breaks out, and Lord, please save us from it, but if any conflict were to break out, we would need to come to that fight with what we've got. And at the moment, we haven't got much. So look, I hope that our senior leaders, both on the political side and on the military side, are thinking not of business as usual, but of expediting and deepening the AUKUS arrangements. And as I said, the obvious thing to do would be to talk urgently to the Americans about getting some retiring LA-class subs more or less immediately. We've now had people training on nuclear subs with both the Royal Navy and the US Navy for a couple of years. Even if we had to operate these LA-class subs with composite crews, part American, part British, part Australian, that would be an improvement on the current situation, because the LA-class subs, as I understand it, are a very capable boat. And sure, they're normally being retired when they're perhaps 25 years old, but there's plenty of redundancy in these sophisticated bits of kit, and I'm sure at a pinch it would be possible to extend their life for a period of time. So that's what I hope we might be looking at. It would be a disaster for Australia. It would be bad for Britain. It would be bad for the Western Alliance more generally if the AUKUS arrangements were to be diminished in any way.
Is AUKUS in the interest of the United States? Because one of the arguments that's made is allies, including Australia, are, as you mentioned before, not doing enough to defend ourselves, and not only the spending, but the efficacy of the spending is not what it should be. And so critics of AUKUS in America are saying, look, why are we underwriting the defence capabilities of other nations who perhaps aren't willing to do as much as they should be?
Well, to be fair to Australia, and I certainly concede that we haven't done enough, but to be fair to Australia in the AUKUS context, we are making a very substantial contribution towards upgrading both the American and the British defence industrial base when it comes to nuclear-powered submarines. So I think the problem at the moment is less that we're not making enough effort with AUKUS, but that we're not making enough effort with the rest of our military. I mean, under the current government, we've not proceeded with the order of another squadron of F-35s. We've prematurely retired one Anzac frigate. We've diminished our order for new fighting vehicles. We're about to retire our last remaining minesweepers. We haven't gone ahead with the order for light frigates. We haven't actually got the domestic missile production facility underway. really it's been a litany of neglect and failure over the last couple of years. I don't say the record of the coalition government was perfect by any means, but it's got even worse, markedly worse, since the 2022 election. But I think it does help the United States if in any operation it comes with allies. The more flags there are with you, the better it is. And certainly if you're talking about Britain and Australia, our armed forces have over many decades demonstrated that when we are there, to the extent that we are there, we are very well worth having. The question is, will we be there, and to what extent will we be there? And that's something that I suppose the Americans are entitled to question, particularly given the Albanese government's consistently conciliatory, that's putting it at its kindest, consistently conciliatory attitude towards Beijing, which I have to say sometimes verges on appeasement. I mean, when you think of the very mild, even timid response of the government to the live fire exercise off the coast of New South Wales just a couple of months back, when you think of the government's, limp response when the Chinese Navy deliberately targeted Australian divers a year or so back, there has been a pretty supine attitude towards Beijing. And I suppose it's in that context that the US Under-Secretary of Defence has ordered this AUKUS review to see how consistent it is with the new America First approach. Now, it certainly can be consistent, but that does depend a little bit on the attitude of the government, and no doubt that's the kind of thing that the Americans will be testing in the discussions between their president and our Prime Minister.
Why do you think it is that this government hasn't been willing to be stronger with China? Is it because of the domestic Chinese population in Australia who predominantly vote Labor? Is it driven by that factor and they're worried about, potentially getting them offside?
That's a reasonable question to ask, Dan. Certainly when it comes to the current government's attitude to Israel and Palestine, there do appear to be domestic political considerations. I think it's less domestic political considerations than, anxiety about the trade relationship with China. We've certainly seen over the last few years that China will turn trade on and off like a tap when it suits the Beijing government's geopolitical purposes. I mean, for instance, when Beijing took umbrage at our reasonable and moderate and modest request for an international investigation into the origins of the Wuhan virus, we had about $20 billion worth of trade boycotts imposed on us. So I think that's probably the biggest consideration with the Albanese government, anxiety about what might happen to our trade. I think it's important to stress with all of our immigrant communities that settling in Australia means joining Team Australia, not simply living in Hotel Australia. And just as you and I have discussed in relation to perhaps some of our Middle Eastern communities, that now that they're here, they should leave their, former considerations behind and look at things from the point of view of Australia's national interest. And certainly it's absolutely in Australia's national interest that we continue to live in a world which is safe for democracy. And one of the perils of these times, should there be, if you like, a change in the global pecking order, is that a world dominated by communist China would inevitably more resemble communist China than liberal democratic America. And whatever America's faults, whatever mistakes America has made as a geopolitical actor, there is a fundamental decency about America and its polity. There's a high-mindedness, or at least there's normally a high-mindedness. There's certainly, if you like, a general benevolence from America, which has made it a benign hegemon in a way that no other country could be right now.
Well, let's turn now to the domestic issues, Tony, with both the Liberal Party in Victoria and New South Wales. In Victoria, the saga around John Pesutto and Moira Deeming continues, with the prospect of John Pesutto potentially getting bailed out in terms of what he owes to Moira. So just interested in your perspective on the most recent developments in Victoria on that matter.
Look, Dan, it's a very difficult situation for everyone, and I should declare that I've been, throughout this saga, I guess, a friend of Moira. That doesn't mean I'm hostile to anyone else. I just wish that it had never got to this point. And I think it's deeply regrettable that John Pesutto didn't settle this a long time ago when he had numerous chances to do so. At one level, you've got to feel for the bloke. He's in a very difficult position. He doesn't want to go bankrupt. He doesn't want to leave the parliament. He doesn't want to expose the Liberal Party to a by-election that we might not win. But this is a situation of his own making. My understanding from the media, and I guess from some private discussions that I've had, is that Moira made him an offer of settlement. Apparently it hasn't been accepted. I gather I gather this from the media, I gather that there's an attempt to get the Liberal Party to lend money to John Pesutto. I've got to say, a political party that starts to act like a bank strikes me as a political party that's in danger of losing its purpose.
And in terms of New South Wales, we've had the federal intervention into the New South Wales the division of the Liberal Party, which continues at the present moment. Should that be extended? Does it need reform? What's the sort of answer there?
Well, Dan, the important thing to remember is the whole point of this intervention was to try to break the factional stranglehold, which was, I suppose, causing members to desert in droves, and it was compromising the competent administration of the division. You might remember that it happened because a very large number of local government nominations in the Liberal interest were not submitted in time, and this was an act of extraordinary political ineptitude and administrative ineptitude. So the intervention was ordered by the federal executive. I think it's got to have time to do its work. I think that means that it's got to prepare a new constitution that will effectively restore the Liberal Party to its members. My understanding is that some of the provisions of the new constitution, which is in preparation, are to prevent branches from unreasonably excluding new members, to prevent conferences from unreasonably stopping the formation of new branches, to open up State Council to all members who wish to attend, to try to cut down the size of the executive so that it's a much more efficient body for the running of the division. Now, all of these strike me as very sensible changes, and I hope they can go ahead. I mean, certainly the situation that we've had where some 5,000 members have not renewed in the last few years, some 500 members have either been expelled or had their application for membership refused. No branches apparently have been authorised for 10 years. In the end, a political party has got to have a vigorous and dynamic base in the community. Everyone who normally votes Liberal and who is interested in public life, who wants to have their say, who wants to make a difference, should be encouraged to join the Liberal Party. And the trouble is, it's a long time since that's been the case. Hopefully, The intervention will be extended for as long as is necessary to get a new constitution in place, and I gather that this is probably going to be decided sometime this week.
Yeah, and I think it's also what's currently happening in New South Wales, but it's also happening elsewhere, is inconsistent with the vision that Menzies had. I mean, one of the reasons he set up the Modern Liberal Party was because he was frustrated with the factional breakdown of the United Australia Party, and that many within the party, in his judgment, were unable to see beyond their factions, particularly as it pertained to the World War II effort. And that then sort of broke the party down, meaning it was incapable of thinking about things beyond narrow, factional considerations. So I think sometimes as parties shrink, you have people that are even fiercer in fighting for the spoils, like a bird of prey, feasting on a ever-shrinking carcass. There's more intense competition for fewer and fewer spoils, and I think that's what's happening in New South Wales and also in Victoria to an extent.
I fear there's something in that, Dan, and that's why the intervention offered the possibility of a fresh start, just as the Brad Batten leadership has offered the possibility in Victoria of a fresh start. And let's not have the fresh start in either state derailed by what are essentially narrow, factional, if you like, or even personal considerations.
All right, Tony, well, on that note, I think we'll leave it there for today. So thank you very much for your time and insights as always, and we'll catch up again in about a fortnight.
Thank you, Dan.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.